just very quickly, my name is Dan Farkas, and I joined Staffbase about a year ago to lead our sales team. And I'm based here in London, and it's a privilege to be able to present with these two wonderful ladies who I met earlier today. But we have a fantastic content for you. We'll talk about sort of C-suite engagement and leadership, which I hope is very important it is very important for all of us in internal communications, which I consider myself being part of right now. I have realized the importance of communications just before I joined Staffbase, and even more so when I joined Staffbase. As a new leader in the company, I decided that I do want to communicate and be very transparent with our team about everything we do. So I first started writing this weekly newsletter, which I sent to my team every Monday morning, and I've realized recently that people know my newsletter more than they know me. So they come to me and they don't know who I am, but they know my newsletter. So it's a way of communicating with the team and engaging and passing the right messages over. Maybe what I need to do is to show my face more often, but there's also some improvement for me to do as a leader. But regardless of that, I would like to go and ask Kate and Trudy to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their background as well.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. My name's Kate Isichei, and I'm a global internal communications, and I call myself a collaboration consultant too, because a lot of what I do is all about collaboration. I've got a consultancy which I kicked off 4 years ago in 2018, focused on engagements, internal communication planning, leadership visibility, business strategy, education, and knowledge management. And it's been a real roller coaster. I've really enjoyed working with a number of different clients and agencies. And I also host a podcast called Engagement Express. So do check it out and let me know what you think.
Thank you very much. Trudy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dan. So I'm Trudy Lewis, and I am the founder-director of a company called Colinear, and I focus on transforming leadership communications. I'm also a coach, and a big part of that is around building impact and influence as you lead. And again, it's linked to communications. My background is internal communications, and I've worked in the industry for about 20 years. I've worked with industry bodies as related to that, and I love communication, so speak when I can. And I also co-host a podcast with Advita and Jenny called Calmate Rebels.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much for your introductions. And we go straight into the content. So let's start with the definition of what makes a good leader these days. Let's start there. Maybe I'll start with Kate.
Well, I sort of think it's worth categorizing what we mean by a leader. Are we talking about a leader as in a CEO or a managing director or a head of a business? Or are we talking about managers? Is there a differentiation? You know, in some organizations you go to, you get this idea that everyone's a leader. So I think it's important to think about, you know, what we mean when we say leader. If we're talking about a CEO, then yes, to some extent communication, but we talked about it earlier. I slightly disagree with that. Someone who is ideally charismatic, someone who's good with people, and someone who is able to make themselves accessible and is comfortable being around different people from different backgrounds, you know, different levels in the organization, and can be the same person, you know, whoever they're speaking to, authentic and genuine. That's what I would think.
Thank you so much. And I'll ask Trudy to follow up.
Yeah, we were talking about the difference between leadership and management and leadership, different types of leaders, and but I lean towards that everybody is a leader, or everybody has some element of being a leader. I think good leadership comes from being genuine, being yourself, having the ability to do that, also having the ability to connect with people, and not being afraid to be yourself in those instances. And I think that's a huge part of being a good leader. It's about people following you. So there's a level to which you have to be dynamic enough for people to do that. You have to have something that you're saying that people believe in, and people will follow you. And that's true whether you're a CEO or if you're just leading a team. You know, your team has to follow you. So if they're not following you, you'd question your leadership. And it certainly isn't about a position. So just because I'm called CEO doesn't necessarily mean that I have nailed the leadership skills. It means that I've just got that position. So even in our thinking, we have to kind of move on from what that means.
So I'll expand on that, Trudy. And can a leader be someone who is not a good communicator?
I would say no. You know, a leader has to be a communicator in some way. And as we've been having a conversation about this, I strongly know that if you don't even have the appreciation or understanding of what communication is, if you're a leader, then that's the bigger problem. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to be good at every type of communication. You're not going to be able to not everybody can stand up on stage and hold a crowd. Not everybody can hold the audience. So at the end of the day, you've got this little problem going on between that and how do I communicate? But if you if you don't even appreciate the need to understand it or the need to communicate well, then that's where there's a bigger problem. And we see that a lot. It's really difficult.
Absolutely agree. And what I will ask Kate, so if we flip it around and we look at leaders. Leaders are humans too. And we've discussed that earlier. And how do we help them be a leader and be a great communicator? What do we do?
Yeah, Max made a really good point earlier, and I was nodding viciously when he was talking because it's so true, and I've done it myself before, where you've got leaders who are perhaps good at being on a stage and talking to people in a town hall, but put them in a room with some croissants and 2 people, and they fall flat. So it's really important to match the channel with the personality. Make sure they've got the competency to be able to hold that particular audience, if it's a smaller audience or a larger audience. So yeah, making that match and having the ability to be able to do that diplomatically is key. So, without saying, you know what, I don't think you're really good on stage. There has to be a more politically correct way of addressing that leader who might not necessarily hold a crowd.
That's true. Trudy, would you like to add anything to it?
Yeah, it's just important for us to be in that frame of helping them, because we can't make the assumption that they even understand what it is they're supposed to be doing. So we might look at it and say, oh, that leader's being really difficult. I can't get him to do any comms. I can't get him to do any kind of visibility activities. I can't get him in front of people, without thinking that maybe it's the fact that they've got challenges. I've worked with somebody who absolutely, we would walk around, we were doing a video once and we were walking around doing this video, and in the midst of that he just said, I really don't like people. And I said, how do you mean? What do you mean you don't like people? I'd asked him to just simply sit with another employee and pretend to have a conversation so we could film something. And he said, I don't like people. And I said, and he explained it. He said, I don't like this part of the job. I will do it, but I don't like it. I don't feel comfortable. And what we forget is that, like Kate was just saying, we're dealing with people who are humans just like us. So there are things that they feel comfortable with and things that they don't feel comfortable with. And if we acknowledge that sometimes, we can find the right thing for them to do that makes them comply and get involved and so on.
Thank you so much. What I will just say as a summary of what we covered so far is that all of us are leaders in our own roles. Leadership should be and can be seen absolutely everywhere at every level in the organization. We are sitting here mostly as internal communicators, and we are leaders in our way, and we are influencing other leaders to do their job in a way that we would like to see them do. And so as we keep talking and going through these questions, we will be actually touching on both. On you being a leader in internal communications, and you influencing other leaders in the organization. So I just pointed out, and remember that, as Trudy just said, and Kate confirmed as well, is that leaders are also human. So the ones who we are influencing, we have to bear in mind they are also human, and they might have their own quirks, right? Such as some might not even like people, and that's a tough one. But that's an extreme, but then others might want to do other things, like keep more things to their private life and so on, and we just have to respect it. So I'll go to the next question, which is building up on this, which is what has changed in the past 2 years around leadership? What have you seen being now different towards leadership and how communications can help there? Okay, I'll go with Kate first, and
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years, I don't know about you guys in the room, but, you know, the last 2 years has just changed everything from my perspective. You know, I guess you were all working for organizations. I was when the pandemic hit, and so I saw the transition from this very polished, managed communication to, you know, quite ad hoc, quite relaxed, quite informal, a CEO in his study or in his library or even in his dining room, you know, wearing a comfy cardigan with the dog, you know, or cat beside him, or her, as the case may be. And that just, you know, made everything different, didn't it? It just created this level playing field whereby they were not this suited and booted individual. You saw you know, the authentic side of them. You saw the human side of them. And so, yeah, I think you've got much more permission, I think, and more scope to be creative with communications than perhaps you had before the pandemic. And there's this opportunity there that there wasn't before, I think, you know, to do different things.
Yeah, I think in addition to all of that, because that's absolutely true, we've seen a different side of leaders and how they live, but a big part of it is the level of challenge that they have to deal with. So, and in a sense, all of us have to deal with, you know, so you've got, let me try and get my head around hybrid working. You might have been just dealing with them about, I can just barely get them to do a little video on the intranet. Now I've got to get them to interact in a hybrid setting. And that in itself is quite challenging. If you then couple that with, you know, what's happening socially, what's happening in terms of their finances, the fact that people are leaving the organization, all of the different challenges that are coming up are things that impact how they communicate and whether or not they communicate well, and where they see our role as well, where they see us in the frame. So in the grand scheme of things, how will they see communicators? And I think part of that is they won't quite see us as much as they need to see us. Or some will be very much like, I have to reach out, I have to get my communications people with me. So I think you'll see different attitudes coming along as you go, but I think there is there's a real recognition that we need help because in a sense, you know, the leadership fraternity, it's all about, you know, we need more empathy, we need you to be more vulnerable, and most leaders I find are trying to get their head around some of that because they're not used to it. And so if you add that to some of the things that we are doing, it's quite difficult.
absolutely. And I know Kate mentioned earlier metrics that you like to show the leaders when you start working with them. So can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so one of the first things I do when I join an organization, and I would really strongly urge if you don't do it, to do it, is to get data. Because data really makes everything complete and tells your story. So understand your people, know where they are, know the age they are, know their preferences, the kind of jobs they do, the kind of reporting lines they have, the challenges and priorities, all of that to inform your decisions around internal communications, and use that in conversations with leaders. So, you know, I've had many conversations where I've said, did you know you've got, 1,500 leaders, 1,500 people who have someone reporting into them? And what's the implication of that from my perspective? You know, do we need a line manager channel? Do we need to reach out to this community? How competent are they with their communications? How are they interacting with their teams? Do we want to mandate that? You know, those are conversations that I have. And I maybe overly rely on data actually to make my decisions, but I feel quite comfortable in that. You know, that as a starting point. Yes, audit your channels. Yes, understand what people are using, but find out who your people are by using that data, if you can get your hands on it. Because the first thing that happens when you ask HR is, oh, we're not allowed to share it, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's where you kind of push in and fight a bit, because at the end of the day, we need data. One of the things that helps us to get in front of leadership, actually, is the fact that we can sometimes cite data and case studies of, you know, the very things that we're trying to prove. And if we can't do that, sometimes they won't listen to us. So at the end of the day, I'm a strong believer in being a bit assertive I won't say push, just to be a bit assertive as to how you are dealing with these other departments that have information that you actually need. So it's quite critical to get that, and then you can put our communications lens on it and use that to support what we do.
It's like you said earlier, Dan, you know, about being leaders in our space. You know, how do you have that conversation with a particular business, part of the business that won't share information? How do you be accountable for that and take responsibility for it, rather than pushing it upwards and saying, actually, they don't want to give it to me. Can someone solve the issue for me? How do we become leaders in that kind of quandary?
That's right. We actually touch more on this in just a little bit as well. So it's a nice segue, which is how do you successfully engage with leaders and teams? So if you are an internal communicator, and I've got a leader that I need to work with and help communicate better to the organization, what would be your recommendation as an internal communicator to engage with them? Do you want to start, Trudy? And yeah, let's do this.
So one of the things that I always used to do is, I'm going to give you some practical advice first, is actually get to know the people who has the CEO's ear or the leader's ear. So one of them is the PA, critical person for you to really get close to. But it is about relationship building. So I always look at engaging with leaders in 3 ways. You're listening. As a communicator, you need to question and you need to build rapport. And you do that by doing that directly with the leader or with the person that you need to speak to, but you also have to do it with the people directly around him or her, or, yeah, they. You have to get that interaction and that building of rapport. If you don't do that, then you're almost on the back foot already. You've got to get some, it's like you're trying to get intel in order to interact with them properly. I had conversations with one CEO where, you know, we were trying to get him to write a blog. It was their very first blog. We just introduced an intranet, and he was very resistant. He said, I don't write. I don't want to do anything to do with it. And I said, okay, I'm happy to write the blog for you, but you have to talk to me very differently about what you're doing and so on. And all I did was approach it with a conversation about something he was interested in. So he was interested in sailing. And we had this amazing conversation to the point where he got excited and started to show me pictures of his sailing you know, what he'd done. And I thought, how cool is that? So I said, well, okay, I'm going to write a few words and then I'm going to send it to you. And I wrote a few words around the fact, you know, sailing needs a team. So you needed to engage a team, and I kind of framed it around that, and I sent it to him. He said, "Well, that's not what I would say," and he ended up writing his blog because he saw a kind of a part of the story, but he got an angle, kind of a way in, and in a sense, that's exactly where our role is critical, because we might prompt people with just one little thing. And from that, you know, and from little interactions with that, like that with leaders, I've found that they do have that tendency of always coming back to you. So if they know that they can trust you with information, with a conversation, with honesty, because again, you know, I've dealt with leaders where I've been brutally honest about something when they've asked me a question, and it's not alienated them from me, it's made them warm to me, and I think that's a really key thing for people to understand.
So you led with coaching. You literally coached them into...
Tried to.
That's fantastic. It worked, and it's great. It's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
And Kate?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's about being everywhere and anywhere and being omnipresent. And that's what I find works, you know, from an internal comms perspective. You have to be everybody's friend, and you almost have to infiltrate. I love that term that you just mentioned about intel, because it's almost like you're a spy. You know, you're kind of some kind of facilitator, a connector. You know, connecting the dots for people and understanding how the narrative fits in with the objectives and the strategy, and then retelling that, you know, in your own words, you know, in conversations. So, you know, I talk to everyone. When I'm an internal communicator in an organization, I will have conversations with business leaders, with very junior people in the call center, with developers who are techies. just so I can connect the dots and also be some kind of political mediator as well, to get involved where there isn't good communication or good collaboration and facilitate that. So I would say have lots of conversations, connect the dots, be as accessible as you can as an individual. And again, like Trudy said, it's all about building relationships, having good relationship with the gatekeepers, as I call them, the PAs. The PAs and the EAs should be your best friend. If you don't know who the CEO's PA is, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You know, they've got to be a key influencer for you and a key stakeholder. And it's just all about understanding the landscape of the organization, how it works, who the key influencers are.
Makes sense, absolutely. So I know that this topic is very close to Kate's area, so I'll start with her this time, which has to do with employee engagement. She gave us a very clear point of view on this early, so I hope she can share with everyone, which is how much engagement is healthy or a good indicator of a positive work culture.
Well, it's interesting because when I think of engagement, you know, people think of the employee survey, the annual survey, or the biannual survey, whatever it is in terms of frequency. But what is engagement? You know, when people say engagement, is it HR? Is it enablement? Is it empowerment? Is it how happy people are? Is it to do with the scores, you know, the engagement survey? And one of the first things I do when I'm joining an organization or I'm working with a client is I'll go on Glassdoor and I'll look at their approval ratings and their overall review ratings and then match that in terms of my thought process with engagement. So I sort of think, well, you know, how engaged are they? How approved is their CEO? How well reviewed is the organization? Is it D&I? Is it CSR? Is it ESG? I don't think so. So we need to think about what engagement is and how that relates to employee experience. I think it's like Jenny said earlier, we're really talking about employee experience, you know, the everyday touch points, those pivotal interactions with line managers, you know, how you feel as a person when you go into the office or you talk to someone online on a Teams call. How much does the narrative, does the business strategy resonate with you, what you do every day? That, for me, is what engagement is. And how well that plays out is how engaged employees are.
Correct. It's a great answer. Thank you so much for this. And Trudy, do you want to follow up on that?
I think the whole engagement element of it is, it's almost like we're trying to while we're trying to define who we are and define what we do, we have in the past taken on engagement as ours, you know, and there's always been this fight between different departments, one called HR, where we're saying, you know, engagement belongs to us. But what it really is that we understand how we can achieve engagement. We've got the building blocks, in a sense, from the communications that we build that takes you towards engagement. We don't have to own it. And like Jenny was talking about earlier, to do with that very thing of, you know, we don't have to own it. And I think it's an interesting place when we talk about engagement, how are we going to engage leaders, how are we going to engage the teams? It's how are we going to make communication king, in a sense? How are we going to say that communication is really important to this organization? Most organizations that you go into, and, you know, Kate, I'm sure you have the same experience, don't even understand when we say internal comms, and they don't understand what we do. I worked, when I was in-house, I worked with a group where we did this survey with the whole leadership team. They didn't get what we did, so they all came back with different answers about what they thought internal comms did. And so as a result, we were thinking of a kind of campaign. How are we going to engage them a little bit more so that they understand what it is that we do and what we offer? It's really important to look at almost the PR of internal comms. How are we going to promote what we do? How are we going to get people to understand? Because it's when they begin to understand that they can then work with us better. And in a sense, if you think of leading the function, that's where leading the function comes.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree. I actually remember a situation where kind of years ago, I was kind of talking to one of the leaders in my organization, and he was asking me, how is my team? And I said, well, everyone is really happy. And he said, well, I'm not asking you to make him happy, I'm asking you to make him engaged, because these are two different things. And I went back and started thinking about this. about what do we do in order to get them engaged with what they come to do at work. Like happy is fantastic, but you could have happy people who leave tomorrow, they will never come back. They need to be engaged with the work. They need to see their personal growth. They need to be aligned to the growth of the organization, where we're heading. And that's the kind of leadership that we can show them through the power of communications to inform them at scale at what we are about as a company. So yeah.
No, I was saying that's absolutely right, because if, there are different things that prompt people to be engaged with an organization, and sometimes it is the leadership team. If my managers don't talk to me properly, I'm not engaged. Or if I don't see my CEO, which is why as communicators we try to get people visible, because sometimes that's the thing, that's the hook that gets people engaged. But it's probably about promoting how important that is, because if people aren't engaged, they won't be loyal, they won't be advocates. There's a lack of understanding of where brand development comes from, and I really think brand development starts from the inside, not outside. So
I would say to the people in the room, if you haven't come across Engage for Success, which I'm sure you all have, which is the 2008 report by Nita Clark and David McLeod, that's a good starting point to understand what engagement actually is.
So talking about, we've also mentioned it in the previous panel, so the Great Resignation, which is being used a lot, top talent. Obviously, we want to focus on top talent. How can internal communications help retain our top talent? What is it that we can do? Whoever wants to start.
how do we get people to stay?
To stay,
Yeah.
the top talent.
I think we have to make sure that, the whole message about the purpose and the intention of the organization and that vision from leadership comes across. If that doesn't come across, and people don't see the part they play in that, then that's where they begin to say, I'm working hard, I'm involved in stuff, but I'm not working to purpose. And so that at the moment is more important to people than ever before. So there was a time when we always used to focus on just Gen Z as the people who really were heavily engaged in that thinking, but actually everybody is following a pandemic. Following a pandemic, everybody cares about, am I working meaningfully, or am I just working? And if that's the case, maybe I could just stay home with the dog, or maybe I could just become a writer, or do something else, become a gardener. That was the latest one I heard, somebody said. And so it's I think getting them to engage in the work, or in the office, or in the organization, it really takes a little bit of work around getting that trust up. Do they trust the leaders? Do they trust that statement of purpose is real for the organization, or is it just a statement? It's those types of things, and that's where our role is quite integral to that. It's like bringing that to life, and from my perspective, challenging leaders to say, are you standing behind some of the values and some of the things that you're telling people?
I agree 100%. Thank you so much, Trudy and Kate.
Yeah, so, I've been working with a coach recently, and one of the things we discussed was this feeling of incongruence, and if your organization is culturally one thing and you're communicating about another thing, then that's where you've got this terrible disconnect. And it's happened to me quite a few times where you are asked to communicate in a certain way, but you know very well in yourself that that's not authentic, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the culture of the organization. So I think being genuine is really important, accurately reflecting the organization's culture. Even if it's not great, I think it's important to be authentic about that, and to say, yes, we may be transitioning, we may be trying to, change our values or be more of a certain culture than we were before. So for me, it's about authentic communication that's aligned with the culture as it is, talking about the ambition from a genuine perspective. So we are reaching for the stars, but we're not there yet. And just being realistic about, where the organization is and where it's going.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I'll use that as a segue, Kate, because you said where the organization is going. So I'll talk about where is the leadership of internal communications going. And so if you envision what would you like to see from the internal communications community to do to evolve our practice? So I know there's a strong question. So whoever wants to start first, you want to go, Kate?
Yeah, so I mean, I spoke about it a bit briefly earlier on, where I've said that we need to take accountability, be responsible for pushing ourselves. You know, over the last 2 years, we've all heard that we've got this seat at the table, but what's the seat for? You know, what do we do when we get there? You know, do we have a plan, as they said earlier in the staff-based presentation this morning? Do we have a strategy? Do we know where we're going? Do we know where we want the organization to go? Do we know what we want from our CEO, from a visibility perspective and from a comms perspective? So I would say take more ownership and be more accountable. Push a bit. I know it's hard sometimes. We've all been there. We're in organizations that are hierarchical, and we might not have that necessarily that standing in the organization. But who cares? You know, push for it anyway. We know what we want. We know what the organization needs, and we're experts in our fields. So we shouldn't let people tell us and push us around, tell us what to do. Let's use our experience and our knowledge to, you know, maintain that seat at the table.
Thank you so much. And Trudy?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in everything Kate just said, you know, and I talk about it a lot, where we have to become that trusted advisor, but to become that is probably going to be a bit uncomfortable for us, because we have to be determined to push and not give up. And I believe that every internal communicator is, you know, we're great diplomats. We're very good at being using diplomacy to get doors open for us, to get us to get things done. And as part of that, we have to make that decision about who we want to be in this position right now. I mean, I think for the future, we have an opportunity, you know, just off the back of what Kate said, to do with, 2 years of actually demonstrating how valuable we are. We need to hold that seat. We have to hold that position and do something with it. If we've got the ear of leadership because of some of the things that we did in those 2 years, we've got to do something with that. And I think the one thing we have to do is prove our relevance. The challenge we have in these times is that it's very easy for leadership, for departments to say, do you know what, we're just going to get this really young person who can do social media really good so they can post our posts out there without any strategy, without any planning. That means that at some point they'll be saying, I'm not sure that we really need a senior internal comms person. I'm not sure that we need a strategic person or even an internal comms manager. We probably could just get by with having a group of people who can just manage the tactical stuff really quickly. So our role as we're moving up in the organization is to stop worrying about, you know, I don't have the position to speak to leadership. You have the gravitas to do it. So you need to put yourself in that frame. And then in addition to that, it's showing our relevance so that actually they see the importance of that strategy. Because at the end of the day, what I see happening if we don't step up is that they probably will say something like, do you know what, we don't actually need you at all. You know, not to say internal comms will disappear, but the shape of it will disappear. And I think what we have is the power, in a sense, to define what that is and define how organizations use us. So it is going to take some work. It's not easy. But I think, Dan, you were saying earlier how leadership is not easy. So if we are going to be leaders in our own field, we're going to have to take the hard route and perhaps dig our heels in.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Trudy. And I have to respect the time, which tells me that we ran out of time. So I'll just say that we kind of ended up with us saying that as a function, as internal communicators, we have to step up. And we talked about leadership in the beginning, and it's down to our own leadership to influence the leadership that we want to influence by stepping up and leading in defining and being clear around the impact we can make in the organization. So if that's the only takeaway we can leave with you, I think it's a good one, with which I would like to thank Kate and Trudy for a fantastic contribution to the discussion. It's been a pleasure. And if you have any questions, if you're still around, maybe you can still come and approach them.
Yeah, happy for you to approach me. I'll be around for a bit. I think.
Yeah,
Katie,
I'll be
you'll
around for
as
the
well.
next hour or so. So yeah, feel free. Pick my brains.
Thank you so much. That's all. Thank you.